just a week between races, there wasn't actually an awful lot of news to report. France capped off its week of bicentennial celebrations by hosting a G7 meeting at the newly opened Grande Arche de la Défense, the modernist building that faces the Arc de Triomphe and the Louvre down the long boulevard, known collectively as the Axe Historique, as well as forming another axis with the other two highest buildings in Paris at the time, the Eiffel Tower and the Tour Montparnasse. The Grande Arche is actually built about 6 degrees out of true to accommodate the metro station, RER commuter train station and motorway, all situated directly underneath. And in the largest Soviet labour strike since the 1920s, some 110,000 coal miners walked out for better pay and living conditions and less bureaucracy. Within the week, the strike had spread to the Donetsk region in the Ukrainian Republic, where 8 mines closed. Gorbachev sent a personal message to the strikers asking them to return to work, and other Soviet officials had warned them not to endanger the glasnost and perestroika reforms, but no end to the strikes seemed in sight yet. The second James Bond movie starring Timothy Dalton, Licence to Kill, released in cinemas. Taking a more mature tone than previous entries in the series, the film would be the first to earn a 15 certificate in the UK. It was summer blockbuster season, which had been kicked off in late May with the release of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the third and definitely final entry in the popular series. In fact, it was another year of sequels of varying degrees of quality, with Star Trek V, Ghostbusters 2, Karate Kid 3, Lethal Weapon 2, Friday the 13th Part 8 and Nightmare on Elm Street 5, among others, all hitting screens over the summer. But there were original properties too. Dead Poets Society, Tim Burton's Batman, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, seminal Spike Lee comedy Do the Right Thing, teen comedy Weekend at Bernie's, When Harry Met Sally, Turner and Hooch, Uncle Buck, Sex, Lies and Videotape, Shirley Valentine, and LA Takedown, originally an unsuccessful TV pilot that would later be remade by director Michael Mann as Heat. And the entertainment world lost 2 greats, one on either side of the Atlantic. Mel Blanc, at the age of 81, the man of 1,000 voices whose characters, Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, Bugs Bunny and Woody Woodpecker most prominent among them, were beloved by millions. And across the pond, Sir Laurence Olivier, who died at age 82, was one of the most respected stage actors of the early to mid-20th century before making the transition to the silver screen, in particular with his Shakespeare trilogy of Henry V, Hamlet and Richard III.
Once more, unto the breach! Dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead!
And an Oscar-winning turn as the villainous Shell in 1976's The Marathon Man. Despite the short timescale between the French and British races, there was still paddock news. McLaren had a new 6-speed transverse gearbox and rear suspension geometry for better weight distribution. Lotus had reverted to the standard Judd V8 after unsuccessfully experimenting with the Tickford 5-valve head. Benetton had strengthened the rear suspension of the B189 after its spectacular failure at Paul Ricard, and were concentrating on perfecting Nannini's car before introducing a second chassis for Pirot, who'd have to continue with the B188 for the time being. Ferrari had made more tweaks to engine and chassis, and Coloni now had a second new car for Raffanel. Derek Warwick was back for Arrows, still bruised and sore but raring to go at his home circuit, but Tyrrell confirmed that Michele Alboreto would not be returning this season, and that Jean Alesi would continue driving when his Formula 3000 commitments allowed. And the struggling AGS team had let Joe Winkelhock go after he'd failed to pre-qualify for every race so far in order to hire the suddenly available Frenchman Yannick Dalmas. After the British Grand Prix, the pre-qualifying roster would be reassessed based on results so far in the season, and those teams who had expanded to 2 cars would now have either both in or both out. Brabham, Real and Scuderia Italia had almost certainly done enough to escape, and after their points in France, Onyx were also in a position to come out of PQ at the expense of Minardi, the Italian team needing 3 points or more in the race today to beat the drop. There was news for the future too, as Gerhard Berger announced that he would be moving to McLaren, which further fueled that the Prancing Horse would be Prost's destination, but there was also a veritable glut of talented young Italians. Caffi, Capelli, Larini, Martini, plus an in-form Riccardo Patrese, also on the rumoured shortlist. So pre-qualifying went ahead once again, and once again it was Bertrand Gachot who topped the times, having seemingly got the Onyx singing just as he liked it. Nicola Larini was second, having missed out last time but looking good in testing and practice. Third and fourth were the Brabhams, both making it through for what they hoped would be the last time, meaning that Stefan Johansson and Alex Caffey, both strong contenders, would miss out instead. As usual, the rest were some distance behind, with Wojtek best of the rest, about half a second off Caffey. And so to qualifying under glorious July skies, with the McLarens as usual making the running, Senna taking his first ever British pole, though Nigel Mansell, always fired up by the Silverstone crowd, was second on Friday, before Prost pushed the home hero off the front row on Saturday. So Mansell and Berger lined up on row 2, with Patrese 5th and Gugelmin 6th, determined to put his awful race in France behind him, and vocal about how good the CG891 was after its indifferent start. Boutsen and Capelli lined up behind their respective teammates, with Nannini and Piquet making up the top 10, the three-time champion a lover of Silverstone, finally feeling like his Lotus was working for him. Martini set out Minardi's stall to avoid the drop into PQ in a great 11th, followed by the two Lolas, Modena Brabham and the other Minardi of Sala. The British viewers had to look all the way back to 18th to find the rest of their drivers all together, with Palmer, Warwick and Brundle ahead of Gasho and a disappointed Jean Alesi. Roberto Moreno dragged his Coloni into the race for a change, out-qualifying Paul Ricard points scorer Guiar, with De Cesaris and Pirro on the back row, and Eddie Cheever a surprising addition to the usual DNQ suspects after never getting his car set up balanced. The first time since 1984 that an Arrows had failed to qualify. The top 5 cars had all beaten the 1988 pole time even without turbo engines, while even the slowest cars were over 2 seconds faster than the previous year's back row. Gordon Murray explained to ESPN.
It's a few factors. Although we did have normally aspirated cars last year, this year we've got 10 and 12 cylinder cars, which are producing more power. And the car's weight limit is 500 kilos as opposed to 540. That in itself is worth about a second a lap. And the third factor is that the normally aspirated engines are much more drivable in the second half of the corner, coming out of the corners. So if you actually took some cornering times, the second half of the corner this year is much faster than last year. The initial bit of acceleration and balance coming out of the corner. Those 3 factors put together adding up to the difference.
With the usual bumper crowd out to see their hero Nigel Mansell and the weather continuing to be glorious, Mansell duly obliged by going quickest in the Sunday morning warm-up in race trim, and then it was race time as the cars lined up on the grid. Gasho had demolished his Onyx in the morning warm-up and lined up in the spare car, and at the last minute Gugelmin's March sprang an oil leak and he'd have to start in the spare car from the pit lane. And at the end of the parade lap, Nicola Larini peeled into the pits to have a loose wing mirror replaced and would also be starting from the pit lane. The rest got away as the green light went, with the 2 McLarens charging side by side for Copse, with Mansell and Berger close behind. Prost got ahead initially, but Senna got back past, and Prost had to alternate between pressuring Senna and being pressured by Mansell. Larini left the pit lane late, and as he came round to complete lap 1, he was startled to see 2 men on the track. Unseen by the cameras, Chief Safety Officer and race starter Ronald Bruncherrider and FISA President Jean-Marie Balestre were crossing the track on foot at a leisurely pace, having forgotten that Larini hadn't come round yet, and only Nicola's quick reactions prevented him from taking both of them out. While they went off to change their trousers, the top 6 had sorted themselves by team, with the 2 McLarens, 2 Ferraris and 2 Williamses, while Moreno was the first casualty with a gearbox failure after just 2 laps. Berger's move to McLaren probably couldn't come fast enough for the Austrian, as his Ferrari lasted all of 4 laps before having to come in to have an electrical problem looked at, so the Williamses moved up 1, though Boutsen was having some clutch problems of his own. Nannini was 6th behind the pair of them, with Nelson Piquet 7th, Pierluigi Martini up to 8th, then Capelli and Alio making up the top 10. Capelli took the place from Martini at Abbey as the McLarens began to ease away from Mansell. Meanwhile, in midfield, Satoru Nakajima was chasing Brundle, and the ESPN commentators decided to stop talking for a minute and let the viewers listen to the engine note, so now you can too. Mansell was still hanging on to the McLarens as Berger got going again after several laps stationary, having had pretty much everything electrical on the car swapped out. And then on lap 12, the back of Senna's McLaren stepped out on him and sent him backwards into the kitty litter in retirement. A rare driver error? No, his new gearbox had failed to find third at just the wrong moment, and he hadn't been able to compensate in the time with the accelerator, so off he went. So Prost retook the lead, while Senna philosophically climbed out and wondered if that had just cost him his title defence. 4 DNFs in a row now, while the crowd, unaware of what had gone wrong but pleased that Mansell had moved one place closer to victory, hooted and catcalled. Mansell scented the win too and was stuck to the back of Prost like glue, but Alain wasn't going to make it easy for him. Meanwhile, behind them, there was a fine 5-way scrap going on between Boutsen, Patrese, Nannini, Piquet and Capelli over 3rd through 7th places. Patrese got past Boutsen as Capelli slowed with a transmission failure on lap 16, and Ricciardo began to pull away as Thierry began to come under pressure from Nannini behind him. But Patrese wasn't pulling away for long because a stone punctured his radiator at Stowe, dumping water on the track just in front of his rear wheel, and off he went, destroying his Williams in the tyre wall after skipping mostly over the gravel. No 5th successive podium for him today. So on lap 20, just before 1/3 distance in this 64-lap race, Prost led Mansell, with Boutsen 3rd, chased by Piquet, who'd got past Nannini, with Alliot now up to 6th in the Lola, whose Lamborghini engine seemed to be occasionally smoking. Alesi was going great guns once more, now up to 7th, with an equally impressive Gugelmin just behind after starting from the pit lane. Nannini dropped a few places after making a tyre stop shortly afterwards, while Piquet made his way up to 3rd past Boutsen, the best position held by a Lotus all year. Goodyear hadn't actually inspected anyone to make a tyre stop, but there was a brief flurry of them as several drivers were finding their right fronts graining. Williams' afternoon failed to get any better as Boutsen came in to have a punctured tyre replaced but lost the clutch entirely and stalled, spending some time in the pits getting it restarted before heading on his way. Alesi blotted his copybook by spinning out of 7th just before halfway, just missing one of the Brabhams and one of the Loti, and stalling it. And then just a few laps later he was joined by his teammate Palmer, who'd been struggling with handling all weekend and now stuffed it into the barrier at Stowe. By now Mansell was some 8 seconds behind Prost as they negotiated traffic, Nigel nearly hitting one of Palmer's missing wheels as he came past the scene of the accident. Things settled down for a while after that, with Mansell seemingly unable to make much of an impression on Prost, but Prost unable to draw away, and then to the audible groans of the home crowd, on lap 43 the Ferrari got a puncture on the front right and bumped in to get it replaced. He was sufficiently far ahead of Piquet not to lose second, but Prost was now some 50 seconds up the road. Of course, Nigel Mansell specialises in this sort of situation and immediately set off in pursuit of the leader, with Piquet some 9 seconds behind him in 3rd. Nannini was still hanging on to 4th, with Gugelmin 5th, and with Boutsen struggling, the Minardi pairing of Martini and Sala had made their way up to 6th and 7th. Just one more retirement ahead of them would see the team escape PQ if they both made it to the end. Prost elected to get a fresh set of boots on lap 48 and came in with plenty of time, only for a sticking wheel nut on the right rear to cost him lots of time, and suddenly Mansell was back in the hunt, now just 12.7 seconds behind with 15 laps to go. That, thought the crowd, was eminently doable. There was a brief panic when a smoking Ferrari pulled over, but it turned out to be Berger, posting his 8th retirement of 8 starts from 15th and 3 laps down. His gearbox had caught fire. As Mansell chased Prost, Nannini, whose engine was sounding distinctly sick with a cracked exhaust, was also closing on Piquet's Lotus, and he got past off-screen on lap 56. Gugelmin pulled in with 10 laps to go with another broken gearbox, which promoted Martini to 5th and Sala to 6th for those vital 3 points. Mansell and Prost were still trading fastest laps and edging towards a 150-mile-an-hour average lap, but Nigel just wasn't making an impression on Alain's lead. In the end, Prost came in for his 3rd win in Britain, with Mansell a valiant 2nd just as in 1988, and Nannini christening the new B189 with 3rd place on its 2nd outing. Nelson Piquet hung on for 4th and the last man unlapped, the second 4th place in 3 races to give the Lotus team a bit of hope for the future. And in 5th and 6th came Martini and Sala, scoring the 3 points between them, and incidentally the first of Lewis's career that kept Minardi out of pre-qualifying and consigned Onyx to another 8 weekends of early Friday mornings. Gouillard was just out of the points in 7th, followed by Nakajima, with a dejected Boutsen 10th, and Pirot 11th in the old Benetton, with Johnny Herbert probably watching on and wondering what he could have done with it on home turf. So Prost now held a 20-point lead over Senna, while Mansell had a win and 2 second places from his 3 finishes, and was now just a point behind third-place Prix in the table. And the Minardi boys made it 25 drivers from 15 teams to have scored in the 8 races so far this season. And a quick thank you to all of you who've subscribed, as there are now over 1,000 of you, which is fantastic. I'm just thinking over some ideas about what to do to mark the milestone, so watch this space.
Soccer player, that's different. I don't know, farmer. I like farmer.
I'd be a golfer or a pilot, one of the two, or a car salesman, I'm not sure.
Probably be a businessman, anything that I can deal with a lot of money.
Walking out, playing for England at Wembley in the World Cup would just be heaven.
I was studying architecture and economy and commerce.
Very easy. I would have liked to be a golf player.
I don't know, I like to have 100 lives and do 100 different things, but no, I enjoy very much racing.